China's $200 billion war chest has turned the Indian Ocean into a chessboard of power, where ports double as military strongholds and debt traps swallow nations whole. India isn't sitting idle. It's building alliances and radar shields to strangle China's ambitions before they can spread. This isn't just a rivalry. It's an arms race over the ocean that keeps the world's oil and trade flowing. For Americans watching at home, this big rivalry might feel closer than it seems. About 80% of the world's oil moves through these waters, so any trouble here could make gas prices and other everyday stuff go up. That's your wallet taking a hit from problems happening far away. Billions of dollars and countless lives hang in the balance as two giants clash for dominance. Welcome to Politalysis, where we dig into the real moves behind the headlines.
If
you ask me, is our relationship normal today? My answer to you is no, it is not.
China has anchored its influence with the String of Pearls strategy, a network of ports and bases scattered across the Indian Ocean. Each one isn't just for trade, it's a potential naval base in disguise, stretching from Myanmar to East Africa. These pearls aren't just for trade, they're fortified positions, potential naval bases in disguise. Meanwhile, India strikes back with its Necklace of Diamonds, a web of alliances and naval outposts aimed at curbing China's expansion. Stick with us as we explore these high-stakes maneuvers, the local and global fallout, and how every American could feel the ripples right at home. This quiet struggle didn't happen overnight. After the Cold War, China and India skyrocketed into economic powerhouses, forcing them to look outward. China's Belt and Road Initiative pumped billions into infrastructure worldwide, while India focused on alliances to balance the scales. The Indian Ocean became the natural arena where these ambitions collided. Now, the numbers paint a picture of tension. China has invested more than $62 billion into Pakistan's Gwadar port, sitting just 600 kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for 20% of the world's oil shipments. Critics say this isn't just a trade hub, it's a Trojan horse for China's navy, giving Beijing a launch pad in the Arabian Sea. Satellite images have already caught glimpses of military infrastructure. Denials aside, the evidence is mounting. And if markets get spooked by looming conflict, say over a strategic port or shipping lane, you could see volatility in your 401k or retirement funds. The global economy doesn't hit pause just because the theater of conflict is far from U.S. shores. Then there's Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. In 2017, Sri Lanka handed it to China under a 99-year lease after drowning in $8 billion of debt, money it borrowed from China in the first place. Coincidence? Hardly. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy, a strategy where Beijing loans money it knows can't be repaid, forcing nations to hand over key assets instead. China brushes off these claims, calling it a win-win partnership. But when warships dock in supposedly commercial ports, trust runs thin. Djibouti, a tiny African nation at the mouth of the Red Sea, is another key pearl. Officially, it's a logistics base for anti-piracy operations. Unofficially, it's China's first overseas military base, complete with runways for fighter jets and docks for aircraft carriers. Positioned near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where 10% of global trade flows, it's a strategic jackpot. Bangladesh's Chittagong port is yet another pearl, upgraded with $10 billion of Chinese investment. Ostensibly, it's just a trade hub, but India sees it as a dagger pointed at its side. As China's influence grows, its debt-strapped neighbors find themselves increasingly dependent. But India isn't backing down. Instead, it's weaving its own web, the Necklace of Diamonds. Unlike China's cash-first approach, India's strategy relies on alliances, military agreements, and carefully chosen ports. At the heart of this is Chabahar Port in Iran, where India invested $500 million to open trade routes bypassing Pakistan. It's a bold move, but Iran's political instability makes it a risky one. Then there's the Sabang port in Indonesia, sitting at the mouth of the Strait of Malacca, through which 60,000 ships pass each year. India's deal for naval access here isn't just strategic. It's a direct threat to China's supply chains. Duqm Port in Oman is another jewel in India's necklace, offering docking rights for warships patrolling the Arabian Sea. Meanwhile, Assumption Island in Seychelles is set to become a surveillance hub, watching over Chinese movements in the western Indian Ocean. Numbers reveal how serious this rivalry has become. India's Navy operates over 295 warships and plans to grow its fleet to 350 by 2030. Meanwhile, China's Navy already commands over 350 ships, making it the largest in the world, and it's pushing for 420 vessels by 2035. The scale of this arms race is staggering. Both nations are pouring billions into shipbuilding, missile systems, and satellite surveillance to dominate the seas. The economic stakes are just as high. China's trade through the Indian Ocean is valued at over $1 trillion annually, with oil and gas shipments making up the lion's share. India, too, depends on these waters for 95% of its trade volume. Any disruption here could send shockwaves across the global economy, spike in oil prices, and crippling supply chains. Look around your house. From the smartphone in your hand to the electronics in your living room, most rely on parts shipped through global lanes crossing the Indian Ocean. If a blockade or a naval standoff slows those supply routes, American companies face part shortages, which could lead to job losses or higher prices for everyone. Even a short disruption can send shockwaves through U.S. factories and small businesses, driving up costs and cutting down on paychecks here at home. But it's not just about money, it's about power. China's push into Africa and South Asia is redrawing political maps. In response, India is strengthening ties with Japan, Australia, and the U.S. through the Quad, a security alliance aimed at containing Beijing's rise. Naval exercises, joint patrols, and intelligence sharing have become routine, signaling that the Indian Ocean is no longer just India's backyard. It's a contested arena. For Americans, that power play has real implications for defense spending and the balance of military resources. Every dollar diverted to counter China's naval buildup might be felt in other areas of the budget, from veteran services to infrastructure at home. Even smaller nations are caught in the crossfire. Maldives, sitting smack in the middle of these sea lanes, has flip-flopped between pro-China and pro-India governments, depending on who offers more aid. With debts piling up and promises of infrastructure dangling, their sovereignty hangs by a thread. The drama doesn't stop at ports and ships. Cybersecurity and espionage are now part of the game. Chinese companies have laid undersea cables connecting Africa and Asian ports, sparking fears of surveillance and data theft. India, in turn, is ramping up its satellite networks, tracking movements and monitoring communications across the region. India has spent $20 billion upgrading its naval strength. Its partnerships through the Quad, a military pact with the US, Japan, and Australia, bring even more muscle. Add to that 46 coastal radar stations and 38 more in the pipeline, and India is building a virtual shield around its shores. Bangladesh now hosts 20 Indian radar systems. The Maldives has 10, and Sri Lanka has 6, with 10 more planned. The Quad's role deserves special attention. The US, Japan, and Australia have reinforced India's strategy with joint naval exercises like Malabar, which showcase unity against China's ambitions. Japan has funded infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, and Australia has deepened defense ties with India, strengthening maritime security across the Indo-Pacific. Even European powers like France and the UK are stepping in, expanding naval patrols and partnerships to counter China's dominance. The numbers tell the story. China holds influence over 15 ports in the region and has spent over $2 billion through its Belt and Road Initiative. India is countering with alliances, outposts, and radar systems, pumping billions into defense and partnerships. But critics question whether India's approach can keep up. Its alliances depend on trust, while China buys loyalty with cold, hard cash. This battle isn't just about ports, it's about perception. China's loans often leave countries buried in debt. Sri Lanka and Pakistan already feel the weight, struggling to repay billions. In 2022, Pakistan faced a debt crisis, with foreign reserves dropping below $3 billion, barely enough for a month's imports. Critics argue China's projects are less about helping and more about trapping nations into dependence. India, on the other hand, markets itself as a partner, not a lender. But critics say that without deep pockets, it risks losing ground. Unlike China's rapid infrastructure rollouts, India's projects often face delays, leaving gaps for Beijing to exploit. Yet there's another front in this power play: the environment. Major port expansions, dredging, and deforestation threaten marine life and coastal communities from the Maldives to Sri Lanka to Bangladesh, where protests have flared over damaged coral reefs and fisheries. Conservation groups warn that unchecked development could transform once thriving habitats into ecological dead zones, jeopardizing both livelihoods and biodiversity. As China and India race to secure strategic positions, environmental regulations often take a back seat. Smaller nations must weigh the allure of promised infrastructure and economic aid against the long-term costs to their natural resources. It's a high-stakes gamble, adding another layer of complexity to a regional struggle that already spans trade, security, and political influence. This battle for influence in the Indo-Pacific doesn't end with ports and warships. It echoes through trade agreements, foreign policies, and environmental negotiations. As China builds physical monuments to its ambition, India invests in relationships that bind nations together. The stakes couldn't be higher. Each decision shapes global stability, environmental health, and the future of maritime dominance. The fight for the Indian Ocean isn't slowing down. China keeps building. India keeps pushing back, and the rest of the world holds its breath. The stakes aren't just regional, they're global. A misstep in this game could mean economic shocks, supply chain disruptions, or even military confrontations. With tensions rising and alliances shifting, one thing's clear: this isn't a short game. It's a global chessboard, and each move could reshape America's role in the world. Which side has the upper hand? China's string of pearls or India's necklace of diamonds? Share your thoughts in the comments, especially if you think the U.S. should step in or stand by. If you want the full picture on how China's Belt and Road Initiative could impact the American economy, check out our other deep dive video next. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay on top of every turn in this global rivalry. Thanks for watching Politalysis.